Erie side, yeah.
So you're driving across South Dakota?
All right, we are back live. And we have Sarah Carpenter with us.
Yes.
And Sarah's here to testify give us a little bit of, hi, Sarah, thank you for waiting. Sarah has testified earlier. She was the chair of the still is the chair of the Rental Housing Advisory Board. And Sarah, where I'd like to focus our conversation today is back when we were considering this bill before. I want to talk specifically about the fee structures and the money raised for the fee structures. Now, there's different rules in 2023 than there were in 2020, and also given the fact that the numbers that you provided us, which we posted, I believe, right? We post Sarah's numbers from 2020. From late 2020 is that I think what's irrelevant to us today to a degree is the costs that you did, estimates that you did with the help of the whole Rental Housing Advisory Board, which included the Department of Fire Safety and DHCD and others. But I want to just focus on the fee structure, and if you could just give us the historical background of not just how you came up with $35 per unit, but also the notion that how fees would pay for this. Now, we originally did this for enforcement. Right now, and we heard from Commissioner Hanford, one of the objections on the table right now is that, well, we've disconnected enforcement from the fee-based system. It's in the general fund right now. Either way, we just took testimony from ADS, and they were talking about how expensive maintaining a registry will be or could be. And I guess leaving aside what the money would be used for, I just want you to go through the math, but also the context of how you came up with it and how you worked studying the different towns that have already implemented this and how you came up with $35.
Okay. Thank you. So as I testified last time, this concept has a very long history. We've been studying this for decades, really. We had a report in 2010 and several in 19 and 20 about the need for the state to step in on the rental housing safety oversight for the health code and our need for more data on rental housing. So sort of backing up, we had several iterations or thoughts on how do we pay for the rental safety portion of the proposal. We originally were proposing general fund money. Public safety, fire safety already is the responsibility of state government. So the concept of combining the rental housing safety code with the fire safety code and having the state inspect it, to us, made a lot of logical sense. And using combined inspectors rather than volunteers from the town. As we sort of proceeded with that notion, we had also looked at how do we get more data? How do we know where the rental housing units are? We had one iteration where we had proposed that the tax department and the grand list information be expanded. Right now, most towns use a program called NEMRIC. It doesn't very adequately capture rental housing information. We'd even gone down a road with NEMRIC to expand their software information on behalf of the town so that it could roll up state data. Some towns already collect that information. The problem is roll up. But that, again, didn't fly with the legislature at the time. We also had deep conversations with the tax department about perhaps expanding the landlord certificate data. They did that, but it's very brief data. It really doesn't give us as much unit information as would be useful. And there's, to be honest, a low compliance with that. People are supposed to do it automatically, but it's still low compliant. So that sort of moved us to the concept of the user fee, which in fact exists now for about 27% of the rental units in the state of Vermont. There's more or less 80,000 rental units in the state. About 4,000 of those are not occupied at the moment. And these numbers may be a little out of date. So that gives us about 76,000 rental units in the state. 21,000 of them are in towns that already have a rental registry and already charge a fee. So this is not a new concept for a lot of landlords at all. And the landlords we talked to, by and large, were fine with that. They understood it, the cost of doing business. One landlord said, I like having a free inspection, then I know I'm compliant. So we built our budgets on a number of about 55,000 units not covered by a town that might contribute to the statewide rental inspection program and provide us data about rental housing. That's sort of how the budget got built. The $35 a unit, we somewhat backed into. We looked at what were other towns charging. The lowest seemed to be about $25 a unit. The highest is $110 a unit. To make our budget work, we felt like 35 at the time would be an adequate amount of money to cover both the cost of the additional personnel for the Department of Fire Safety, as well as the cost for the additional personnel and technology for the Department of Housing and Community Development. Again, those numbers may be somewhat out of date, and you certainly need to speak to those two commissioners to understand where we're at. The budget I presented you, I actually inflated forward by, I think, 3.7%, but again, not sure that that's adequate. But it was working by year 3. We had originally asked for an additional startup of general fund money, which is, I think, in fact, what you did allocate last year, and Department of Fire Safety has used for their startup dollars. There's been no startup conversation or event around the rental registry part of the budget. Embedded in that was a small amount of money for landlord tenant education, which actually the state used to fund, and then a number of years ago withdrew the funding, which was unfortunate. That was about, I think, about $50,000. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. I'm happy to try to answer questions about the construct. We based the budget kind of looking at understanding that there'd be low participation in the front end and that we would need to step that up. So part of the dollars in the DHCD portion of the budget was to provide marketing and support to get information out to landlords. And it's become sort of a circular problem because we don't know how to get information out to landlords because we don't have any contact information with them. And that was clearly one of the reasons that we were interested in the database. We've referenced lots of opportunities, certainly during Tropical Storm Irene, and then most recently during the pandemic. It's been frustrating with no way to communicate with rental property owners. The other thing I just wanted to mention, all of these budgets were based on census data on what we presume are long-term rentals, permanent rentals, which is defined as renting for over 30 days, so 31 days. The thing that's come up front and center in the last couple of years is the growth in short-term rentals. So the budgets were never really taking that into account. Again, we don't track that because we don't know where they are. Some towns do, but there's no state database. VHFA has collected some data working with some of the national databases, and they estimate there are about 10,000 units of short-term rental we don't know what those are, whether they overlap with permanent long-term rentals or whether they're houses or second homes. I think our guess and our gut is that well over the majority of those 10,000 units are not permanent rentals, but they're leasing out of either single family homes or other, short, like a ski condo or a summer home or that. We just don't know. And sort of to complicate this, in other legislation you passed, the Department of Fire Safety is obligated to respond to a complaint in one of those units. I don't think they get a lot of them because people just get up and leave. But that's a layer to new responsibility and a new base of rental units that could be added to the 76,000. I know the hospitality industry is very interested in trying to find a better way to track those units as well. And just sort of a more general thing. We do track units in other ways, but not in any correlated database. The 211 can tell you, not 211, 911, excuse me, if a structure is structured as a rental unit, like a duplex or a fourplex, but they don't know single family homes are rented. The Department of Health, by law, by you, is supposed to be keeping track of all rental units built before 1978 for the purposes of knowing lead abatement and lead hazard. Their database is very dated and my guess is not very compliant. So that's kind of out there as a real gap in tracking what units might need lead abatement. So that's kind of the short version of where we're at. Again, already almost a third of our units are in communities that have registries and they pay it. And it seems to me that when you have the state picking up the balance of those inspections, that somewhat level the playing field, that a fee would be a reasonable thing to add. The question of the day has always been who should do it? Because DHCD, and I recognize how short-staffed they are, but they are the housing agency for the state of Vermont, seemed a logical place to put that that responsibility. Again, there might be options through the tax department and the landlord certificate, and that might be another way to pursue it. As I said, these budgets were projected forward, but have not been particularly updated since.
Sarah, when you say that there's no way to contact landlords easily, and yet we're talking about, we've heard from, there are other sources of this data, like the landlord certificate or tax data, which if I remember correctly was one of the issues, again, in conversations with those several years ago, with those departments several years ago, was that there were privacy issues, there were issues of permission to access at the Secretary of ADS was in this morning just prior to you, and he testified about, we just talked about for even going to Burlington and saying, hey, Burlington, we need you to port your information over to us. We're not charging you money for it, but talking about consent, being able to say, if you're registering your property, do you consent to share this information with another entity, in this case, the state? So I'm just curious to know, like, if there's other information out there, if there are other sources out there, but we can't contact every landlord, I'm having a little disconnect there, because again, I've always thought that this was for one of the reasons to have this list was to be able to contact landlords when laws and rules changed.
Well, the bill, which I'd have to go back and read the exact language, was clear that the intent was for public purposes and it was not for solicitation. It would not be a public list that a marketing company would get to. The intent was that it would be used for a state agency to communicate, not the general public, not the private public, for sure. So we had quite a bit of discussion about that, and I'd have to refresh my memory. David Hall did some work on it. I think we were satisfied that the way the language was written in the original bill, and I can't even remember what last version, S210, I think, would be adequate, to meet that. So you're not making the list public. You're simply using it for communication. And, I would guess, for instance, with the Secretary of State, which has hundreds or over 100,000 contacts. I mean, if there's a change in law for tattoo artists, I would bet you could get a list from the Secretary of State to contact the tattoo artists or the dog groomers, or, we have a lot of lists in state government that we use to communicate information to people. So I don't see that as a really necessarily a conflict. I mean, the goal, for instance, last couple of years when you had all that money, the ARPA money to assist landlords, I mean, it's also one-way communication. Here's the money, here's the program eligibility, accesses if you would. And I think it's important, in my opinion, to remember these are businesses. These are not private individuals. They all have to pay income tax based on the business. Many rentals are corporation owners. So I don't see that. I think the tax department's worry was more overarching because of where they come from fundamentally, and their own statutes. I think a list of folks through a central portal shouldn't be a problem. I mean, I'm, as you know, I'm very involved with Burlington, and we do contact landlords to let them know about things. And I'm not aware of any issues. We use communications go through our Department of Inspections, and Liliana, as I know, appreciate being communicated with. So I really don't see that as a conflict. I mean, I don't know, you should probably revisit that conversation, but I don't see it as a conflict. But I've not heard any conflict in that regard from the towns that already have it.
Right. Representative Parsons?
Thank you. I'm looking at the landlord certificate list from 2022 of everyone who filed, and it has every landlord's mailing address on it. Is there a reason that you wouldn't be able to use a list like that to mail things out for informational reasons or programs that exist?
I think we could. I would say that that's a start. Personally, I think trying to expand that might be a route to go. For informational purposes, that would work. I think it doesn't give you the depth of data you want to know about housing stock, like, how many units in the building, bedrooms, those kind of things. That is part of this, I think, is for planning purposes and understanding where do we have rental housing, where do we not have it, what is the scope of rental housing. So building on that, to me, also would make a lot of sense. I don't know why we couldn't do that. I do understand the tax department had some reservations about it, but personally, I mean, these are businesses, and I don't know why we couldn't ask them a few more questions and build on that.
Yeah, it has their span number, units, town, all that information in it. The second question is, in the years of conversation through of this program, one thing that jumped out at me was the maintenance of the program, of creating the registry and then you know, it's gonna take yearly costs to maintain that registry.
Yes.
Was there any talk about, all the towns that we're gathering information from that already have the registry? Or we're just accepting their information, putting it in our system, but not collecting any of the fees that we would be from everybody else that are used to maintain the system?
We had that discussion. I think because they maintain their own system, we didn't want to double charge the landlords. And so we felt like we would need to find a way to accommodate what they already collect and somehow combine it with the system we have. So the intent was we don't want to double charge property owners already paying to. We didn't get as far as sort of the logistic of how that might happen. I think in the bill, if I'm not mistaken, it asks the towns, it's clear that we're not going to charge you double. We're not going to take that responsibility from you if you want to maintain it, but that at some level you need to start developing a database that would be could sync with the state. And I'm not a techie person. I think the sense is that that shouldn't be so difficult to do, that there's access databases and ways to combine what they have with whatever the state came up with.
Thanks. I guess I was just kind of wondering if, I appreciate the not wanting to double charge them, but if the thought of, you know, that town or city's program kind of remitting a $10 per unit kind of fee to the state program or something like that is talked about.
I mean, that would probably be more ideal, obviously, from the state's point of view. We were kind of trying to be firm on not double charging towns, and the budget seemed to work okay with not doing that. As you know, the budget probably needs to be updated. So that would be certainly something to look at. And as I mentioned before, none of this was built on charging a fee from the short-term rental folks. So that's a source of revenue that would need to be added to these projections. And since we've had such a growth in short-term rentals, I think that will be important to be included. And I want to point out about that, we know that there's a lot of sort of back and forth between long-term and short-term rentals. I mean, there are people who, happens in Burlington, they rent their house out during the academic year, long-term to somebody, a student or something, and then during the summer, they might short-term rental it. So I think combining the database with short-term rentals and long-term rentals makes some sense.
That's all I have. Thank you very much.
I've got a quick question.
Representative Bruce?
What are towns currently charging?
I can send you the latest stats. As I said, it's anywhere from $25 a unit to $110 a unit. And there was a chart in our original report that is looking at that. I had an intern to volunteer last night that they would try to update that. So I can, if there's updates, I'll try to send you that chart.
Thank you.
And the average is more in the $50 range, I would say. And again, it depends on the town. Some towns, there's a batch of towns that use their own grand list to keep track of information and don't charge a fee. They sort of feel like it's their responsibility. And these are towns that have an MOU with the Department of Fire Safety to be responsible for the oversight of the rental housing safety codes in their town. I will say, when we had any iteration you could think about, I mean, it's important to remember that this now it was a responsibility of the town. So the towns are losing their responsibility, which is the right thing. But we have, could just ask the towns. who really are, continue to have some responsibility.
All right. Any further questions for Sarah? Thank you so much for sharing that information with us. We just wanted to, get some of the background from the Rental Housing Advisory Board.
I encourage you, I'm not so actively involved, but it is important for us to get this information, be it a proactive registry or an expanded landlord certificate. We're halfway there, and it's just unfortunate that we can't take that next step. And I understand as well, going into the future, we need to continue to support the state function of fire safety as well, and figure out how to pay for that. And since almost a third of the landlords already pay a fee, to me, the fee concept should not be burdensome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be in touch, I'm sure, over the next
Thank
few
you.
weeks. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay.
All right, committee, let's take 10 minutes.